The moment my sister-in-law stood up from her chair and tapped her wine glass with a butter knife, I felt my stomach drop, not from fear, but from the sharp, quiet thrill of knowing exactly what was about to happen next. "Marcus," she announced, loud enough to turn heads at 3 neighboring tables, "this is your chance to show everyone what kind of brother you are. The bill is $8,400. Pay it." She smiled the way she always smiled, wide, hungry, absolutely certain that the world would rearrange itself to accommodate her. My husband straightened in his chair. He reached across the white linen tablecloth toward my purse, toward the card I always carried, the one he had used 43 times in 3 years without asking. I let him reach for it. "My name is Sofia, and I have been married to Marcus for 3 years. 3 years of birthday dinners I didn't plan. 3 years of family emergencies that somehow always required my debit card. 3 years of watching my sister-in-law, Diana, treat our marriage like a subscription service she hadn't paid for but fully intended to keep using. Tonight was her birthday party. A 100-person dinner at the Whitmore Hotel on 5th Avenue. A DJ. Centerpieces that looked like they cost more than my first car. And a bill that Diana had never once intended to pay herself. Because that was my job, according to her. Let me take you back to the beginning. Because if you're going to understand what I did tonight, you need to understand what 3 years of this actually looked like. The first time it happened, we had been married for 4 months. Diana called Marcus, crying her landlord had raised her rent by $300 and she couldn't cover it. Marcus turned to me with that expression I had come to dread, soft eyes, apologetic smile, and said, "Just this once, babe. She's family." I transferred the money. I told myself it was a one-time thing. It was never a one-time thing. Over the next 3 years, I covered a weekend trip to Miami that Diana called a business retreat but was really a bachelorette party for her college roommate. I covered new tires for her car, a laptop she said she needed for her freelance work, but which I later saw her using exclusively to watch reality TV. I covered 2 months of her gym membership, a vet bill for her dog, half the deposit on her new apartment when she decided the old one had bad energy, and a $1,200 handbag that she described as an investment. Every single time, Marcus asked me. Every single time, I said yes, because every single time, he promised it would be the last. It was never the last. But here is what Diana never understood about me. She saw a woman who said yes. She thought that meant I was easy. What she never noticed was that I was also the woman who handled the finances at a mid-sized investment firm. I was the woman who built spreadsheets for fun on Sunday mornings. I was the woman who had been quietly, methodically, and completely legally preparing for this exact night for the last 4 months. She thought I was a doormat. I was a receipt printer. And tonight, I was finally ready to hand her the bill. Marcus pulled my purse toward him and unzipped the front pocket where I always kept my card. He pulled it out, held it up briefly toward Diana like a trophy, and stood to wave the server over. Diana leaned back in her chair with the self-satisfied expression of someone who had never once been told no. I picked up my water glass and took a long, slow sip. The server approached with the card terminal. Marcus inserted the card. The machine processed. The room around our table continued its low hum of conversation, crystal clinking, soft jazz from the corner quartet. Then the terminal beeped. Not the soft, approving chime of an accepted payment. The flat, sharp, definitive sound of a decline. Marcus frowned. He withdrew the card and inserted it again. Slower this time, as though the machine had simply misunderstood. It beeped again. Diana set down her champagne glass. "Marcus, what's happening? Hold on." He jabbed at the keypad. "It's fine. The machine's probably just glitching." The server, to his credit, kept his expression professionally neutral. "Sir, would you like to try a different card?" Marcus turned to me. His voice was still calm, but I could see the first thread of panic pulling at his eyes. "Sofia, give me the backup." I looked at him steadily. "There is no backup." The table went quiet. Not just our table, the 2 tables on either side of us, the ones that had been politely pretending not to listen, went quiet too. Diana sat forward. "What do you mean there's no backup? You always have a backup." "I did," I said. "I used to." Marcus put the declined card flat on the tablecloth and lowered his voice. Sophia, this is not the time. Give me the card. That is the card, Marcus. That's the only one I brought. Diana's jaw tightened. She's doing this on purpose. I told you she always does this at my events. She can't stand that people love me. I turned my head and looked at her. I wasn't angry. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't emotional. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't fighting tears the way I might have a year ago. I was simply, completely, and entirely done. Diana, I said, I'm not doing anything on purpose. That card declined because the account it's connected to has a zero balance. A very specific silence descended on our corner of the restaurant. Marcus leaned in. What are you talking about? I checked that account 2 days ago. I know you did, I said. There was $34,000 in it then. Diana's eyes darted between us. So, where is it now? I set my water glass down gently. Ask your brother. And this was the moment I had been waiting for. Not because I wanted a scene. Not because I wanted applause or attention or to humiliate anyone in front of 100 people, though I will admit the audience did add a certain clarity to the evening. I had been waiting for this moment because, for 3 years, every single conversation Marcus and I had about money had been private, but behind closed doors. In our kitchen, in our bedroom, in hushed voices, in parking lots after family dinners. And somehow, every single time, Diana still got what she wanted. Because private conversations with Marcus had a way of disappearing. He would agree with me at home and then fold the moment his sister called. So this time, I needed witnesses. Marcus's voice dropped to something close to a hiss. Sofia, tell me what you did. I didn't do anything to your money, Marcus. I moved mine. Diana slapped her palm flat on the table. This is unbelievable. It's my birthday dinner. And she's pulling this stunt right now? I kept my eyes on Marcus. 3 weeks ago, you transferred $11,000 from our joint account to Diana's business account. You didn't tell me. You didn't ask me. You just did it. The table nearest ours had gone completely still. The couple sitting there was no longer pretending to study their menus. Marcus's throat moved. That was a loan. I was going to pay it back. With what? I asked. With the $8,000 you transferred the month before that? For her car repairs and apartment deposit? Diana stood up from her chair. Those were emergencies, Sofia. That's what family does. They show up for each other. But you wouldn't know anything about that because you've never once. I transferred $47,000 to your accounts over 3 years, I said. My voice didn't rise. I had rehearsed this, not the words. I didn't have a script, but the calm. I had rehearsed the calm until it lived in my chest, like something permanent. I have every receipt, every Venmo record, every bank transfer with your name on it. $47,000. For a woman who has told every person at this table that I'm cold, selfish, and impossible to love. The room was very quiet now. Diana opened her mouth, closed it. Her eyes cut to the guests around us. Friends, coworkers, cousins, people who had been celebrating her all evening, and for the first time I had ever witnessed, she didn't seem to know what to say. Marcus reached across the table and grabbed my wrist. Not hard, but firm. Outside. Now. I didn't move. I'm comfortable here. Sofia. So, here is what happened to the joint account, I continued, because I had not driven 40 minutes in heels and sat through 4 courses of food I barely tasted to stop now. 4 months ago, when I found the second unauthorized transfer, I called my attorney. And over the following 6 weeks, with her help, I moved every asset that was legally mine, my salary deposits, my investment contributions, my inheritance from my grandmother that I should have never mixed into a joint account in the first place, into a new account. My account. In my name only. The joint account had $34,000 in it 2 days ago because Marcus put his last paycheck in there. I didn't touch it. I left it there. I just didn't bring that card tonight. Diana pointed at me. You planned this? Yes, I said simply. I did. Marcus let go of my wrist. He sat back in his chair slowly, and something in his posture changed, the pride deflating, the performance ending, the reality of the evening settling onto him like a coat that was several sizes too heavy. The server, who had been standing at a respectful distance through most of this, approached again with apologetic professionalism. "I'm sorry to interrupt. We do need to settle the bill this evening. Is there another form of payment?" Diana turned on him. "Give us a minute." "Of course. I'll be just." "Marcus has a card," Diana said, turning back to her brother. "Marcus, use your own card. Stop letting her control everything." Marcus was quiet for a moment that stretched uncomfortably long. Then he said, in a voice I had never heard from him before, smaller, deflated, stripped of its usual easy confidence, "I maxed it out last month. Covering the deposit on your new studio space." The color that left Diana's face in that moment was something I will remember for a long time. "You what?" she whispered. "You said it would only be 2 months. You said the investors were coming in. Marcus, that studio cost $18,000. "I know what it cost, Diana." The quiet that fell between them was a different kind of quiet than the one that had surrounded me. Theirs had edges. Mine had finally gone smooth. I opened my clutch, my actual clutch, the small beaded one I had carried all evening, and took out my phone. I found the contact I needed, pressed call, and waited. It rang twice. Sofia. My attorney's voice was calm and familiar. I had called her from this exact number enough times in the past 4 months that she picked up without ceremony. "Rachel," I said, "I need you to confirm the status of the transfer we completed on Thursday." There was a brief pause, the sound of a document being pulled up. "Complete. The assets have been fully moved. The new account is in your name only, no joint holders. The retainer for the separation proceedings has also been received and logged." Marcus went very still. Diana stared at me. "Separation? Thank you, Rachel." I ended the call and tucked my phone back into my clutch. "Sofia." Marcus's voice had gone hoarse. "What is separation proceedings?" "It means I have filed for divorce," I said. "Or rather, I have retained an attorney and prepared to file. The papers will be served tomorrow morning." Diana pointed at me again, and I noticed her hand was shaking. "She's bluffing. She wouldn't do this here. She wouldn't do this in front of everyone." "I did it in front of everyone," I said, "because the last 3 years happened in private. Every time I asked Marcus to stop giving you money, it was in private. Every time I told him I felt like an ATM instead of a wife, it was in private. Every time I showed him the bank statements and asked him to explain the transfers he had made without telling me, it was in private, and privately, nothing ever changed." I stood up from my chair and smoothed the front of my dress. Around the table, no one moved. Diana's coworker had her hand pressed over her mouth. 2 of Marcus's cousins were looking at the tablecloth. "So I decided," I continued, "that the next conversation about money in this family would happen somewhere, that everyone who has watched this dynamic for 3 years could finally see it clearly." Diana's voice cracked. "You're ruining my birthday." I looked at her, and I want to be honest. I felt something close to sad in that moment. Not for her, but for the version of this that could have existed. For the sister-in-law she could have been. For the 3 years of goodwill I had extended to someone who never once extended any back. "Diana," I said, "you ruined your own birthday the moment you decided your happiness was something other people were required to fund." I reached into my clutch one more time and removed a card, not a credit card, not a debit card, but a business card. I set it on the table in front of the server. "This is my personal account," I told him. "I'll cover my meal, my husband's meal, and the 2 place settings next to mine. The remaining bill is the responsibility of the guest of honor." The server nodded with the kind of professionalism that must be very difficult to maintain in situations like this one, and stepped away. Diana's voice rose. "You can't do that. You can't just Marcus. Tell her she can't do that." Marcus said nothing. He was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on his face in 3 years of marriage. I couldn't name it exactly. It was somewhere between recognition and grief, the face of a man who had just understood, far too late, the full cost of every choice he had made. "I tried to tell you," I said quietly. Just to him. "I tried so many times." He nodded once. Small. Nearly invisible. I picked up my clutch, said goodnight to the couple at the nearest table who had witnessed far more of my marriage than they had bargained for when they made their reservation, and walked toward the exit. I was almost to the door when I heard footsteps behind me. Quick, deliberate ones. Not Marcus. Not Diana. I turned. It was my mother-in-law, Barbara. She had been seated at the far end of the head table all evening. Mostly quiet in the way she was always mostly quiet at Diana's events present, but peripheral. A woman who had long ago learned to stay out of her daughter's spotlight. I had always liked Barbara, without knowing quite how to reach her. She stopped in front of me and put both her hands on my arms. "I knew," she said. Her voice was low. Not all of it, but I knew it was wrong. I should have said something a long time ago. I looked at her and felt, unexpectedly, the sting of tears that hadn't come once during the entire dinner. "You didn't do anything wrong," I told her. "I didn't do enough right," she said. She squeezed my arms once, and then let go. "You take care of yourself, sweetheart." I nodded. I didn't trust my voice enough to say anything else. Outside, the November air hit me clean and cold. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, letting it settle against my skin, watching my breath disappear in small white clouds. My phone buzzed. A notification from my banking app the payment I had authorized inside had processed. My portion of the bill, paid. I opened a rideshare app and requested a car. While I waited, I thought about the first transfer I had ever made to Diana's account 3 years ago, $300, sitting in the kitchen of the apartment Marcus and I had just moved into together, thinking this is a one-time thing. I thought about every time I had swallowed something that needed to be said. Every time I had told myself that keeping the peace was the same thing as keeping the marriage. Every time I had looked at Marcus across a dinner table very much like the one I had just left and told myself the next conversation would be different. The car pulled up. I got in, gave my address, the apartment I had already arranged to take over the lease on in my name alone, and watched the hotel entrance disappear in the rear window. There would be calls tomorrow. From Marcus, from Diana, possibly from various family members who had opinions about the public nature of what they had just witnessed. My attorney had already prepared me for all of it. There would be paperwork and logistics and the particular exhaustion that comes from dismantling a life you had built alongside someone else. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, my hands were in my own lap. My card was in my own clutch. My name was on my own account. And the dinner bill, all $8,400 of it belonged entirely to Diana. I looked out the window at the city going past, lit up and indifferent and beautiful, and I thought about something Rachel, my attorney, had said to me the first time I sat down in her office 4 months ago. Documents spread across her desk. Every transfer and receipt I had cataloged laid out in order. She had looked up from the spreadsheet I brought her and said, "You built a very thorough case." I told her I worked in finance. She said, "No, you paid attention." "That's different." I paid attention for 3 years. I watched and I documented and I waited, not because I was calculating or cold, but because I kept hoping I was wrong. I kept hoping the next month would be the one where Marcus came home and said, "I see it, I'm sorry, it stops now." I kept hoping Diana would call one day, not to ask for money, but just to talk. I kept hope alive far past the point where most people would have let it go. But hope, I had learned, is not a financial plan. The car turned onto my street. The building where I had signed a new lease last Thursday looked exactly the same as it always had: brick front, green awning. The window box on the second floor that the woman upstairs had filled with autumn flowers that still hadn't died in the cold. Normal. Quiet. Mine. I tipped the driver, stepped out onto the sidewalk, and stood still for a moment. My phone lit up in my hand. Marcus. I watched the screen until it stopped ringing, then turned it face down in my clutch. Tomorrow. Tonight, there was nothing left to explain. I went inside, took off my heels at the door, and stood in my own kitchen in my own silence, and for the first time in 3 years, the quiet felt like something I had chosen.